Welcome to our virtual event, The Future of Construction. Today we will hear from several industry experts on how COVID has impacted the construction industry and how we have adapted to enable work to continue. Joining us today, we have James Walker from Sigmat Limited, Lawrence Macbeth from Alument Systems, George Pelger from MyDeck, Lee Wilmhurst from Steelbuild, Phil Chitty from Sapphire Balconies, David Jones from the Institute of Construction Management, and Nick Horton from Sapphire Balconies. During the interviews and presentations, if you have any questions for the panel, please do scroll down to the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce James Walker from Sigmat Limited. Today he'll be talking about the speed of construction with light gauge steel.
Hello, James. Thanks for joining us today. A big welcome to all our viewers that are joining us live today for this event. We've got James Walker here from Sigmat. He's going to be talking us through the light gauge steel frame and exploring the future that might have in a post-pandemic world. So to begin with then, James, do you want to just tell us a little bit about Sigmat and your experience there?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sigmat was, or PAW Structures as it was originally named, was founded in 2002, and its primary purpose was a lifestyle business for two gentlemen that had come out of a main steelwork fabricator supplier, and they were using it just as a lifestyle business, as I say, and they predominantly subcontracted things out and just project managed the process. And it was mainly hot rolled steel sheds, little office buildings. But in 2005, they got an opportunity through one of their suppliers to provide a light gauge structural steel frame for a Premier Inn, as it actually happened to be. And that's it. Sat very well with them in terms of how their business operated. And it was using a third-party system, so they did the design. The third party did the design, the detail, and then they subcontracted out the panel assembly and the site erection and managed the process. So that was the first foray into off-site construction for what is today Sigmat. Off the back of that, further opportunities came. I joined the company in 2006. Primarily to head up the on-site role, managing the on-site processes. And as the company had a lot of engineering talent, we were able to offer transfer structures as an add-on while still using the third-party system, albeit we took a healthy interest in how they designed it, how it went together, and we were one of the main driving forces for that system in terms of developing it and moving it forward and making it more user friendly and more buildable. So as we grew, we took each individual element back in house. That started with the panel assembly in 2007, and then by 2009 we were designing it for ourselves, and we had a number of in-house erection gangs, so we were controlling it from source to site in effect, with what was the third party in effect becoming a steel supplier to us. The next logical step for us was to take that giant leap into, should we actually be buying a roll forming mill for ourselves, and what should we be doing with it? And at the first instance, we looked at what we could take a very simplistic C-section, like a lot of the systems that are already on the market, or we could take this opportunity, grab by the scruff of the neck, as it were, and re-engineer light gauge steel framing. And that was the view we took. It increased the amount we had to invest significantly, but ultimately we come out with a C-section that is around about 20% stronger than the generic sections that were already on the market, and we've gone from strength to strength there. We're happy to go up to 15 stories, The only reason we stop at that sort of limit is because it's the difference between a Class 2B and a Class 3 structure, and you need to start taking into account the potential for airplane strikes and different load cases that we believe we can accommodate, but only for maybe up to 17, 18 stories, and there's enough out there under 15 stories to keep us, hopefully to keep us busy for the foreseeable future.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks for giving us that overview. So I guess, could you talk a little bit about why a contractor or architect might actually go with a steel frame building over alternative methods?
There's a number of benefits in light gauge steel, and it's, to call it lightweight would be wrong. Light gauge is the right term for it, because it's not significantly lighter than a comparable structural steel frame. The steel's more spread out, and we're using sections that are only 3 to 4 mil in thickness, but we've effectively got columns at 600 mil centres rather than 6 to 9 mil centres. But it does afford you a lighter solution, so there is a benefit in foundation loads. Certainly against a traditional concrete frame, that's even more pronounced, and the lightweight nature of what we do could be the difference between having a piled foundation or a raft foundation or a more simplistic foundation, which can give you program benefits at the start, because piling is going to take a significant amount of time, and the more time you're in the ground, the longer it takes you to get the frame to site, and it all leads on from there. And again, with the way we build, we're building horizontal slices, so you can get following trades in earlier. You can get more going on sooner, so you can compress that overall program. So there's a benefit to the contractor in that respect. In terms of the architect, we've got fire and acoustic test data that we're happy to share, so they know what the build of the walls are going to be very early. That we produce as part of our tender package when we're looking at a job. We'll produce a layout. We'll give them the layout of the steel very early, so they can accommodate into their early stage design. We could be engaging at REBA stage 3, and are more than happy to do so and help develop the design to better suit the light gauge steel frame systems. We've got a short animation of a typical job. It is based on a real job that we did in Scotland. It's an 8-storey student accommodation, and hopefully it'll give you some insight into how a light gauge steel frame building goes together on site.
That's very helpful. So you mentioned like program benefits, etc. There is there, or could you give us some kind of, I guess, overview of the advantages of the light gauge steel system, and then also maybe explain to us a little bit as to why you think it's become popular in common months and years even?
Certainly. I mean, in terms of program, there's a benefit on site in that we are slightly quicker against a traditional structural steel or concrete. Again, we can offer concrete floors without the need for backpropping, which gets your following trades in sooner. We would always say leave a clear floor between us and any following trade. So if we're working from ground, once we're putting the second floor panels up, the following trades can be in on the ground floor, putting windows in, lining the walls, anything that's not moisture susceptible. Because whilst we try to mitigate water ingress as best we can, it's not a waterproof system. It's showerproof would be the best analogy. And also you've got to be mindful there's stairs, lift cores that are open to the elements that water ingress will potentially get into the structure. But as I say, you can get the following trades on sooner. There has to be an element of choice by the contractor to go that way and nail his course to the mast early and go, this is the method to build. So the architect can get all the details together and put together right. But it's that surety that we offer in our on-site programs. We'll put these buildings up with, if there's a single crane hook, a 4-man gang will erect 1,000 square meters of floor area, including laying the decking and concreting the floor in approximately 2 to 2.5 weeks. Measure that against a structural steel frame, you probably go 3 or 4 stories up in the air before you put the decking and the rebar and the concrete in. On a concrete frame, you may have a slightly longer period floor to floor, but you'll have a significantly higher number of staff on site. You'll be 20 to 30 men against a 4-man gang for ourselves.
No, that's helpful. So there's some clear advantages of using that method over a traditional concrete frame or steel alternative. Is there sort of 5 key points that you might make an architect or designer aware of that they should be considering when designing?
Yeah, the key ones for us, number one, would definitely be traceability in the building. We're moving into a time where residential properties are becoming more and more prevalent to us. Our bread and butter over the last 7 or 8 years has predominantly been the student accommodation market and hotels. And the advantage of them is the room centres are quite close. You've also got the advantage that they tend to trace floor on floor, whereas environments of residential is very different to a hotel or student accommodation. But as part of that and our drive to move towards that sector, we've developed our own decking profile, which can span up to 5.1 metres unpropped, which gives you a lot better flexibility, but you still need to have that floor-on-floor traceability. That's not to say that you can't alter the floors, but the more alterations you make, the more hot rolled steel you've got to put in, and the less efficient as a structure it becomes. The other one, slenderness, is another key one for us, because each wall works as a shear wall in effect. If we're very tall and slender, it's quite difficult for us to get the bracing into the structure. So you've got to be mindful of the proportions of the building. A nice big floor area with walls in both directions is the best solution for us. Getting on board with your door and window schedules early is another key one, because what you've got to remember is at sort of the end of Reba Stage 3 going into Reba Stage 4, if we're coming on board, whilst we're doing elemental design and we're positioning walls and designing the studs in the walls, we've also got to position the structural openings and allow for the steel that goes around them to factor in. Another one would be stairs and lift shafts. Lift shafts, we form them as part of the frame, but the information from the lift manufacturer is key to ensure that we can put the door openings in the right place, and the pickups for the guide bracketry for both the doors and the lift car itself in the correct locations. So and that's sort of like probably point 5 as an overview of it all. It's integration of getting all the elements of it integrated together as soon as possible, not leaving decisions on the external facade, the window types, to the point where it's on site. So there's a bit of I don't want to say compromise, but it's the best word I can think of, in that you've got to compromise and make them decisions earlier, which in terms of the client and his cost plan and his end product, it probably actually makes a benefit for him, because he knows what he's getting, he knows what he's buying sooner. He's not leaving it to a main contractor who's on a D&B and he's going to wring every last penny out of it, and swap suppliers at the death because it benefits them to the tune of a couple of pence.
Oh, that's really useful as well. So you mentioned there's obviously multiple things there that they can be considering throughout the design. Is there any complexities that an architect might come across that could actually be designed out or mitigated when they were designing it, that they can sort of consider and maybe get rid of at the same time, if you see what I mean, without having to wait further down the chain for that issue to arise?
Traceability is probably the key one on that one, and making the building stack simplistically. That's not to say, as I said, that's not to say we can't do ornate different shaped structures. We've done curves, we've done sloping walls, but architects won't want to hear this, but a nice simple square box is the easy solution, but they're not the ones that you make your name with. Roofs is always not a complexity, a choice that needs to be made soon and will influence how the building is developed. If you go with a lightweight roof, it benefits the building and the structure because it's lighter, but we can accommodate pitched roofs. It's just the way you go about them is slightly different, and it creates another interface that you don't necessarily want. But again, that's not to say we can't form a pitched roof, but if there's no room in the roof and it is just a simple pitched roof, the most simple, cost-effective solution to integrate is just to go with a simple timber truss rafter roof that basically sits on top of the structural frame. So
you mentioned earlier on as well about the engagement between the suppliers and the integration, etc. How important is early engagement with the steel frame, the light gauge steel frame here?
For our point of view, it's critical, because the earlier you engage, the better it can be, particularly if you're engaging at them earlier stages in terms of the architectural design. So the design is done and drawn with the light gauge frame as the original concept. The majority of projects that we see to look at and tender come in, they're either traditional masonry, structural steel frames, or reinforced concrete. So you've then got there's a bit of adaptation needed to get it back to a light gauge steel frame. If you took a concrete frame, for example, where they have a shear wall that could be 250, 300 mil thick, we've effectively got series of shear walls, and our stud walls are 100 mil thick, regardless of where they fall in the structure. It's the gauge thickness of the steel that changes, not the outside dimension. So once you put the build-ups on that with your dry lining and your resilient bars, you're going to be, if you've got 2 layers of board and a resilient bar both sides, you're going to be 192 mil wide, and you get that across the board. certainly for party walls, internal walls within the demise of a residential unit. You probably don't need resilient bars. You can be down to 160 because you still need to give it that 2 layers of board for the fire protection. So there's probably a bit of give and take in that some walls would be thinner in a more traditional build, others will be thicker. But we see time and again on projects where they actually do the process after our involvement, they actually save space on the gross internal footprint of the building, or they can actually increase the internal space of the flats without actually affecting the overall dimensions of the building.
That's helpful as well. So you've mentioned a number of things throughout this that would obviously be quite helpful probably in a post-pandemic world, the future of construction. Could you talk us a bit through how you feel this system could actually help in a post-pandemic world, the advantage it might have to construction?
Certainly in the light of the current situation and social distancing, the fact that we've got a lesser number of employees and operatives on site will aid social distancing. A project that we were on in Birmingham, the main contractor had originally looked at concrete frame. He'd done all his prelims based on that and created his welfare space based on that. Did his ground, his ground bearing slab, ready for us to arrive, and he'd got a welfare facility that was capable of catering for up to 80 men, or 80 employees. We came along and we'd got 8. So there's certainly an advantage there. Whilst they ended up later on in the job needing that facility as the following trades came on board, they could have mitigated against needing it, and they could have brought the welfare facilities on stream at a later date and saved on their prelim costs. The other advantage during this period is we haven't stopped in the factory, because within a factory environment we've been able to mitigate and put social distancing in place, and where we have had to have people working at closer quarters, we've been able to put in place relevant PPE, face masks, shields, gloves, overall suits and the like where needed. So you've got that ability to distance, and it helps as well that you've got that quality of build from off-site from the factory as well. So you don't need swathes of people going to site for remedial works.
Yeah, that's very helpful as well. So there's definitely the consistency of quality coming from the factory, especially during COVID, where you can continue to produce where a lot of sites, I guess, would have been shut down. So can you talk us then a little bit as well through the being a lightweight system, how that actually integrates with the balcony connection, and how that works together?
Yeah, on a number of jobs, obviously we're working with yourselves. Depends on the method of build that we're going through and the floor system. Ideally, if there's a balcony, and again for us as a solution, we would always proffer and advocate a concrete floor. It's just a bit more robust, certainly in terms of fire and acoustics, but it also, in terms of the balcony, it gives a very good substrate for it to connect back to alongside the external wall panel. And again, it's very simple. You can either create a frame that is an integral part of the light gauge steel system, or we can put brackets and stubs out for other parties' systems to put in and allow for cold bridging with Nylotron, and that's one of the products we use is Nylotron, which is just a hard-wearing plastic, but there's also other products out there where they've got different properties in terms of fire and acoustics, anti-vibration, things like that.
That's been very good. So I guess sort of final question then around, we've sort of touched on it already, but that relationship between the frame contractor and the actual balcony provider, how important is it to actually ensure that like the connection detail is as simple as possible, but can actually be effective?
Again, it comes back to that early engagement with what you're building. The earlier you engage, the earlier you can have that sit down and look at the size, the location, the regularity of the connection details, and the more you work together, the greater that symbiosis becomes, and you understand people's details better, to the point where standard balcony, if there ever was one, could have a standard connection or a standard type of connections. And again, that's something we're progressing. We're not there yet. It's always about that continual improvement. We're moving towards trying to create standardized connection details, standardized components. Whilst every building is bespoke, there's certain elements of it that will always be similar or the same. So creating them, whether it be in the factory or in the 3D modelling software, to speed up the production of the model and the factory works, but also be able to share that with architects, engineers, other elements, whether it be facade contractors, balcony systems, be able to share them details and develop them details to create a better solution that's, I don't want to say simpler, because it isn't, but it's cleaner, would probably be a better way of saying it. It's a clean way of working. That's
been very useful talking with you, James. So I guess just sort of give a bit of a recap, we've covered quite a few benefits and advantages of the light gauge system here. We've got the program benefits in the increased speed. You've obviously mentioned there's less people on site as well, which would definitely help in a sort of post-pandemic world, with the likes of social distancing in place that we see at the moment. And there's definitely key areas as well that I think are takeaways, such as the early engagement, that are key as well to actually making something like this a success, especially when it's integrated with balconies, for example. So again, thank you very much for joining us. For the sake of the viewers, again, if you have any questions, by all means, please ask them on the Slido that should be right below this video. Any questions you ask will be answered live by our panel on the 30th of September. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, James. I'd now like to introduce Lawrence Macbeth from Alumet Systems. Today, Lawrence will be talking about the advantages of unitised facades.
Hello to everyone and welcome to the viewers today. Joining us live for an interview here with Lawrence Macbeth from Alumet Facades. It's great to have him on board, and it's good to be able to discuss the potential of unitised facades and its role it might play in post-pandemic world and how it might shape future construction. So to start off, Lawrence, would you be willing to give us a bit of an overview of Alumet and your experience with unitised facades?
Yeah, of course. Alumet was formed in 1992, effectively by, and our founder is still our CEO, Gary Summers. We were set up as a window and curtain wall fabricator back then, and sort of evolved and grown the business into a £30 million plus specialist subcontractor. Probably fair to say that much of our history has been in traditional stick construction and curtain wall. But having said that, our first unitised project was done back in 2008, which was a pretty large blast-resistant unitised facade for a nuclear establishment. And we sort of built the business into we're a residential company, really. Now, most of the work that we do is work for the private residential sector, mainly in London, but we are looking at work and doing work in Manchester and in the other conditions, but mainly with the big residential contractors. So a lot of the work we do is at height, over 20 stories, and much of it is specified in unitised. So the obvious next step for us was to get into unitised application. And in order to do that, we very quickly realised that we needed to have either a very, very big factory or two factories. And I think what we did, we chose the latter. And we, 3 or 4 years ago, we picked up a factory that was for sale. It was grown aluminium. And pretty shortly after that, we picked up a large unitised job in London for will show how currently, we've probably got 5 or 6 unitised schemes that our big team are looking at, and we're about to, fingers crossed, pick one up very soon. So yeah, we've run. We've had a long history in facades, and we see the future massively in unitisation. That's the where we are.
No, that's good. So I guess then, again, for the viewers, what are, I guess, 5 key points maybe an architect or specifier could consider when designing a unitised facade? Maybe some areas of complexities they can actually design out if they're aware of these considerations?
I think one of the key issues when we get a scheme on the table, one of the key issues we look for is repeatability and standardisation of detail. There's clearly the benefits of unitisation from a fabrication point of view. It's making the production process like a car production line, so that you need repeatability. Effectively, if every single element were the same, that would be ideal, because you literally have the elements in a flowing from workstation to workstation, like in a flow line. So I think repeatability is key, which sometimes architects, obviously, when they have free range, quite like to put multiple products, multiple planes, complicated interfaces. So clearly, we have to try and balance the needs of the aesthetic versus the needs of the practicality. But there will be a point at which, when it becomes too complicated, to unitize it becomes expensive, and at that point, potentially, there's perhaps the need to change back to a stick or a more traditional methodology. Obviously, the other consideration is how high is the building. There's a point at which stick construction becomes uneconomic, which, depending on who you talk to, that height varies really. But we've done stick construction up to 30 floors. That was getting near the edge of it, just purely by delivering materials, literally. And that's the issue. It's the time and the inefficiencies involved in that. So anything over, certainly anything 25 stories and over, should definitely be unitised, I think. And depending on the simplicity, any building at height should be unitised, because the benefits it creates are really excellent. So I think from a design point of view, that you look at those things. You also need to look at, because unitised facades slightly different to stick in terms of how you install them. The deflections on the floor slabs need to be considered and make sure they're compatible with the system parameters. Likewise, U values. If you consider that when your entire facade is built off-site, everything that facade needs to perform to, whether that be fire regulations, U values, whatever, needs to be contained within that element. So sometimes, because the relationship between the amount of metal and the space you've got for insulation means that the U values you can achieve are limited. So you need to kind of bear quite a lot of attention to that. So that's another of the points. And also, of course, which will be something important to yourself, is how do the balconies fit in it? Are the balconies? Do you require the balconies to be fitted to the elements as you launch them? Is it a course-fitted methodology? And clearly, all of the buildings, very few of the buildings that we have don't have balconies.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty key point as well, and one where you need to get into early consultation with the designers, I think.
On the balconies themselves, then, is there? You mentioned obviously the post fix, etc. Is there multiple methods which we can work with that obviously fix the balconies to the unitised facade? Can you run us through those?
Well, and again, don't forget, we're talking from our sort of relatively limited experience. That obviously with stick construction, they're well-known methodologies. But I think what we've looked at mainly is the Sapphire version. Effectively, where there's obviously you have to fit this cast in, and there's a bit that we need to build inside of our element, whereby we would launch the elements without the balcony on, and then we would post fit them. So that's kind of as we move up the building, and that's how I think we were planning to do with the 2 or 3 bids that we've got on the table at the moment. So that's kind of how we're basing that.
No, that's good. That's helpful. Thanks. So on unitized facades, then, why do you think they're sort of preferred over traditional methods of construction, and maybe what the advantages are of them?
Yeah, I think it sort of boils down to about three areas really. One is first is safety, and I put that first for no other reason than it should be first, because it is probably the most important. Because obviously, building at height, multiple pieces, however you do it, whether you do it from scaffold or from mass climbers or however you do it, there's an inherent danger in things falling. So the more work that you can do off-site as opposed to on-site, it's got to be safer. And I think that's a well-known, that's well accepted among the industry. The other is similar to that, but it's to do with quality and repeatability again. So effectively, everything that you're doing, interfaces, structural stability, aesthetics, you're doing it in controlled environment where the QA, QC are going to be much more easily recordable and manageable, as opposed to on the end of a scaffold or up a mass climber with 10 degrees or 40 degrees or raining, snowing, whatever. So clearly there are quality benefits, and there's also for the more commercially minded, there's obviously cost benefits to it, because whilst there may be a bigger upfront cost because you need to be manufacturing elements a long time in advance in the factory, when you actually get to site, you spend less
from what we've talked about there, which you think are key for people who should building owners or people doing a refurb on a project? What are the key things that they should consider in deciding whether they should refurb a building, and if so, what are the key things they should be looking at?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about the future in terms of choosing your product, choosing a quality product. Costs a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it's future-proof in terms of the regulations that are still to come in, and the regulations and practices that are inevitably going to we kind of leading towards. As I said earlier, people are leading towards more of a holistic safety. People should feel safe in their homes, and so that's all leading towards doing the work and doing it right. And the other thing is to consider when you are doing your refurbishments is there are no shortcuts. It needs to be done in the right way, but there are ways of making it more efficient and more cost effective.
Sure. And for those who are yet to be convinced that they need to refurb their buildings, what do you think are the considerations which they should consider in deciding whether they should be refurbing that or not?
Don't wait until there's an incident, which then people can point the finger to you and say you didn't do enough, or you're responsible for people losing their lives. We're talking about lives here, and we're talking about people's well-being. You shouldn't have to compromise on that. The money should be spent, and that's the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate your input. Anyone who wants to ask you any questions, you'll be joining the panel discussion as well. So please feel free to submit your questions now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. If you have any questions for Jeff during the live Q&A session later today, please do input them onto the Slido link below. I'd now like to introduce Lee Wilmshurst. He's from SteelBuild, and today Lee will be talking about staying productive through lockdown and looking forward with SteelBuild.
Hello, Lee. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you here with us today. Would you like to start just introducing yourself to the audience?
Myself, I'm Lee Wilmshurst. I'm Managing Director of SteelBuild.
Obviously, this is the second time you've joined us on these series of events we've been doing. The first time was right at the start of the COVID lockdown. Be interested in a bit of an update from you, Lee, to start off with, about how sites generally are working and how you've actually found working on construction sites during the pandemic.
To be fair, in a whole, it's been positive. We set out a lot of procedures at the early stages of the pandemic, and we carried out, I'd say, in excess of 40 site audits of differing customers to make sure that we were happy for our operatives to attend sites. And I think we probably had 2 that we had to refuse entry, but on a whole, a lot of people really come on board, especially after the initial few weeks. People really started to up their game and understand what was expected of them. So as a whole, I think it's good. If I'm really honest, I think it's slackened off a little bit of recent times, but it's our duty as a company to manage that ourselves as we move forward, because unfortunately what comes with life is complacency when you live with something for a while.
In terms of measures that sites have been putting in place and the actual contractors you're working with and the developers, what sort of measures are you tending to find across the industry are being implemented as sort of standard practice now?
Well, obviously the basic principles. So social distancing is everywhere. There's signage throughout all sites. Cleaning regimes are upped. The way they manage traffic on sites is different. The expectations on site are slightly different as well. So from a management perspective, we've had projects now that don't require a monthly audit to just manage the unnecessary visits to site. So just to be fair, it feels sort of normal, if it's normal now, if that makes sense. It's been happening so long, the normality has changed and things have calmed down. as I say, unfortunately, what does come with this is complacency, but that's something for us to manage.
Sure. And you told us last time about the fact that you guys are working with visors and so on because of certain works which obviously require people to be within that 2 metre. Andrew, appreciate the government has clarified certain things, particularly for the construction industry as well. But what sort of measures are you putting in actively yourselves or have already put in? Do you mind just recapping on some of those ones that you're still running?
Yeah, well, recently we've just reviewed our COVID risk assessment and we've actually released some measures. Not the important measures still in place, but we've released some of the over-the-top measures. So we've still got in place our internal track and trace. That's been going on now since the very beginning, I think in March. So we've got something like 5,000 entries on it, which creates a green board of any weaknesses within our company, and I'm happy to say that we haven't had any. We still use our visors, so we still implement the visors. I know things are a little bit less required now, but as a company, when we did our risk assessment, we believe it's still a good control measure. We'd invested in all the equipment and there was no necessity to remove it because it wasn't impacting on our work. All of our buddy system and all of our travel arrangements are still the same as what they were. We haven't needed to change those. We have recently merged our company back together. We are doing it strategically because we're aware of mental health as well. So where we've had people working at home, we still have people working at home, but not permanently. So we rotate people in and out of the office so people can meet other people. People can still be involved in the company, but still being aware that risk is still around.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of general trends you're noticing across the industry, do you think things like hygiene and general safety awareness perhaps is improving? Or do you think it's just something, a temporary measure for the time, and it's probably not going to stick around once the pandemic's tailed off, whenever that may be?
I think in and out of work, to be honest, hygiene is going to improve because if you look at the control measures, really, they're basic principles of life which we should be adhering to anyway. Even with the close contact of people's body fluids, if that makes sense. So the basic principles, I think it will definitely change and make people more aware. Will it? Hopefully, it won't stay exactly as it is right now. But I definitely think it will make people aware going forward.
What do you think, as a general rule of thumb, what would you say are general practices which site managers or directors or project directors and so on should be making sure their sites have definitely got in place? What are the key things in your mind?
I think ventilation in offices, avoidance of crowded areas, obviously social distancing. But more importantly, I think as time goes on, is reinforcing from a senior level, reinforcing what you believe is happening on your sites. Because I think it's very easy, as I say, human nature, complacency. And if I'm really honest myself, I had this talk internally over my own company a few weeks ago. Like myself, I found myself getting complacent, and not in a way where I was contravening anything. But I remember times when I got out of a vehicle and went to shake someone's hand. Not because I had to refrain from that, but I found myself going in a direction I didn't want to go in. So as I say, as a human nature, it's important that we reinforce what the control measures are and why they're there.
Do you think with the future? Well, let me restart that. Last time you were with us, Lee, you were talking about the assessing for COVID being similar to other safety assessment, where you were looking at the principles of kind of trying to mitigate what you can and then putting backup measures in place to best protect those which can't be mitigated or migrated. What do you think in the future? Do you think that we're learning principles now which will better improve health and safety generally?
I don't know that we're learning principles right now. There's some good features, even like the accountability of where people are. I think that's quite a good tool. Again, in work, but also out of work, it's really becoming a tool which is quite useful. I'm not sure it'll have an impact directly on the industry, like long term, if I'm honest, because as I say, it's quite bespoke to what we're doing. As I say, the basic hygiene and bits and pieces, yes, I think we'll take that forward. Our other control measures, I'm not sure that they will continue on throughout the industry, if that makes sense.
So Lee, if you compare the procurement process in construction at the moment to what it may be in the future, do you think there's things which are going to be affected in that process because of the things we've learned during COVID?
Yeah, I think so, mate. Definitely, I think going forward, the company's going to have to look for more stability in their supply chain. I think it's shown vulnerability through certain sectors and through certain supply chains. So I think that's going to be a key going forward. Obviously, with planning and procurement and lead times, where everything's always accelerated and pressured, that's going to have to be considered going forward, because what has been found during this is there's no movement room to accommodate anything like this. And I'm not saying there's going to be another COVID-19 occurrence later on, but it does show you how programs can suffer quite easily with a few delays.
Yeah, sure. And do you think from a labour point of view, do you think people are going to be accepting that construction will take longer, or do you think that more processes perhaps might be taken off site?
Yeah, I think realistically, commercially, processes can't take longer, but the way we do things has to change. And I know the industry is already changing, and the focus is on modular builds, etc. So definitely going forward, I think that was probably in the forefront of it all anyway, and it needs to be considered more now. Yeah.
In terms of the pandemic, what about your company in particular? Has it given you confidence in your company, and do you feel the future's bright for your company?
Yeah, I do. My hand on my heart, I feel we're very fortunate. But one thing this has taught us is that whatever has been thrown at us, my team is united, and we've worked together, created new processes, adapted, and just moved forward. I'm not saying it's had no impact, because that would be wrong of me to say that, but it's had very little impact compared to what it could have had. And that was because we just adapted to the environment. We've kept everyone safe. We've invested and put in the control measures that were required just to allow us to continue.
Sure. And do you think that's culture-based, or what do you think the main driver is to that?
Yeah, I do think it's culture-based. A lot of our staff have been with us a long time anyway. I think integrity is key in circumstances where people find panic. People look for focus and structure and how to move forward. And therefore, I think if the leadership is correct, that kind of follows through the business. And I think it was shown throughout our business, through all levels, that everyone could trust the decisions being made. Everyone was communicated and respected. Everyone's personal feelings were taken on board, and no decisions were made without confrontation with the team. In fact, not confrontation, without communication with the team.
Yeah, great. And in terms of looking ahead into the future, we've obviously got things. The Brexit word might become a bit more popular a bit near the end of this year. There's other regulations like the fire regulations which are changing. Do you think these things generally might change anything for you in terms of subcontractors working on sites?
I'd like to think the lessons being learned over the past few years with fire regulations, with the COVID, and possibly with Brexit, whatever's going to happen there, that supply chain is key to the future. So whereas in the past it's been very commercially driven, obviously there's a commercial aspect to everything, and I respect that, but there is more behind a company than just the value. The value is in the monetary value. There's a lot when the company's got so much structure and strength and stability that has to be considered. And I think the light of what's happened of recent years will enforce that and help make better decisions for companies going forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you pick up there. And with the Hacker review, we talk about the golden thread and the different quality procedures in a way which are being implemented because of an awful tragedy. But do you think that's going to put much more focus on the whole quality processes and so on of companies during that procurement phase moving forward?
Yeah, I think inevitably it has to. I don't think that it can have anything other. Unfortunately, it should be there anyway. I think it's not even just with fire. I think across the industry, quality has been a big driver of recent years, and I think now the value of quality is really starting to come to the front of things, and decision making is so important, whether it be front end or back end of a project, because they have massive output consequences if the wrong decisions are made, whether that be a wrong supply chain or whether it be a wrong product used within a building. Yeah, sure.
So summing up for us, Lee, what do you think are the key takeaways which may influence how construction looks in the future? What do you think are the biggest things which we may have learned from this pandemic, or things which are happening now which will likely change what the future of construction is?
I think stability is one. So stability within companies, within supply chain, within customers. Program. I think there's going to be much more thought about now with program and how tight the deadlines are. Processes and how we achieve the data required. That's going to have to be thought about. They're probably my key takeaways from what's happened in recent times, I suppose.
That's great. And Lee, we really appreciate your input again. It's good, especially to get a bit of a measure of where things have changed since the beginning of the pandemic. For those of you who haven't seen the interview earlier on, you're welcome to revisit that. You can access that through the ResiBuild website. But if anyone's got any questions for Lee will be joining our panel a bit later on. So thank you very much for your time, Lee. We look forward to you joining us at the panel discussion.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Lee. I'd now like to introduce Phil Chitty from Sapphire Balconies. Today, Phil's going to be talking about keeping Sapphire safe and productive.
Hi, my name's Phil Chitty, and for the last 5 years, I've been the Environment, Safety and Health Manager for Sapphire Balconies. Initially, COVID did make a few changes to our working practices. A few of our sites shut down. Certainly, we sent all of our staff home immediately. Our construction sites and clients that we were supplying to continued to call for balconies. Certainly through March, April and May, we still delivered 800 balconies to site over that period of time. And they were all fitted. So we were still sending balconies out, we were still delivering balconies. To keep up with our clients' requirements, we were still manufacturing balconies. There's two very different sides to how we've had to change over this time. Working practices and what we do for our staff's welfare. By immediately, almost overnight, deciding that all of our staff were going to work from home, we made a significant difference to their home life. To have to set up an office at home, to suddenly be working with your children around you all day, with the rest of your family in the house, was a huge disturbance for people. We brought forward a lot of our staff meetings, so we had a weekly consultation with all of our staff. We had a ring around service and we had a support service so that members of staff who were experiencing a few problems in the household could certainly give us a ring and we would offer them the support that they needed. Any one thing like COVID, when it comes along, we very much look at that from a risk assessment perspective. So when COVID did come along, we looked at our site operations. We looked at the effect that this would have on the chaps that we got going out to site for us. We consulted with them, very important, in any health and safety changes, and put a number of measures in place just to be able to keep them safe while they're out on site. At Sapphire, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is our engagement with our supply chain. We very much look at our supply chain as partners, not people who supply to us or not people that actually work for us. It's very much work with. We have helped our supply chain. We've given them advice, guidance and support at the same time as they have with us. But it still doesn't mean we haven't had a couple of instances where there is the possibility that either a member of their staff or a member of our staff may have contracted COVID. We put measures in place immediately as soon as we've been notified. That includes suspending all visits to that supplier. That will include, if that supplier is storing balconies for us, suspending deliveries to site or any loading operations that are done on that site. Obviously, with an effective supply chain, that goes up to clients as well as down to suppliers. We have had a couple of instances where we've had to delay deliveries to site purely because our operation has been affected by COVID in some way. Our clients generally have been very sympathetic, they've been very understanding. I'm sure they've probably had their own situations where they've had to do similar. So our experiences have certainly been that everybody has worked very, very well together through this. We like to build relationships with our clients as well as our supply chain so that they are good and solid, and I think this probably just shows that. As we've gone through the COVID period, we have actually found that we are working a lot closer with our suppliers and our supply chain up and down. By closer, obviously, I don't mean physically closer. We still keep our social distances as best as we can. But we have found that there is an amount of sympathy and understanding when either a supplier or a client has a COVID issue. We're very supportive up and down that chain, and as are our clients and our suppliers are also the same. As a safety professional, I hope I can speak for safety advisors, safety managers up and down the country, where I say one thing that really has come across out of COVID is the realization that a risk can suddenly make a huge difference to the safety of those on site, the safety of those in your offices, and the safety of those at home. By working together with people, by continuing to work through this COVID period, we can ensure that safety stays the absolute priority and we keep our people as healthy as we can for as long as possible.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to hear about how Sapphire are keeping their staff safe while still staying very productive during this time. I'd now like to introduce David Jones from the Institute of Construction Management. Today, David's going to be talking about CDM regulations.
So welcome, David. We're very glad to have you on board with us today and to learn a bit from your experience. Would you mind starting off just telling us a bit about yourself?
Okay, thanks, Nick. Yes, basically, I'm a chartered surveyor and fellow of the Chartered Institute of Building, and I've been in the industry for 5 decades of continuous experience in the construction industry. I've enjoyed my time immensely as a multidisciplinary professional with skills in design, project management, architectural design, surveying, development, and senior management of teams across 3 large London local authorities. An early part of my career included civil engineering as part of the teams of some of the international iconic structures around the world. The concrete ski jump hill in Lahti in Finland for the Winter Olympics. An incredible triple water towers in Kuwait City. The 100,000-seater sports stadium in Tehran, Iran, is now named the Azadi Stadium. Previously, it was, when I designed, a part of the team designing and building it, was the Ariamea Sports Stadium. The architect, Aziz Farmanfarmayan, I worked in his team, and that was in the days of the Shah Pahlavi time. Later, in the UK, I developed my skills and expertise in facade engineering and design, working with major architects on some of London's icons too. The 54 Lombard Street was the old Barclays Bank headquarters. Minster Court, the Gothic structure near the Tower of London, and Thames House. A lot of you know that from the James Bond films. In 1994, I was one of the very first tranche of the UK construction professionals to get operational in the then new CDM regulations. I held statutory appointment duties in all of the CDM disciplines, starting with commissioning client officer. I've been a planning supervisor. I've been a CDM coordinator. I've been a principal designer. I am a principal designer and a principal contractor. Also integrated through London Technical Advisors Group and Transport for London across 33 London boroughs on their highway authorities. And I was delivering CDM training That was on the old CDM 2007 iteration. So in 2007 plus, I became an acknowledged training author on UK's award-winning online training to public services. That was unique at the time. My online project trained and accredited well over 8,000 in-house local authority property and construction officers across England, Scotland and Wales. That project actually won Constructing Excellence in 2007 for CDM. Then again, it won Constructing Excellence in 2011. And that was for leadership and people development. I was personally awarded a Health and Safety Champion by the Health and Safety Executive in 2008, which I'm very proud. I'm lead author appointed by the Carbon Trust to create the new CIBSE manual on biomass boilers, and that was published in 2012. I'm also a UK patent inventor of a gravity opening smoke vent. Currently, I am developing on that a smart opening vent. That's an inventive step on what I'd previously done. And I'm with the Kent Inventors Forum that meets at Greenwich University, and they support us on that. I was invited by the European Commission to present in 2014 the concept of developing a pan-European unified training portal for the whole of Europe's 16.4 million construction workers. Actually, even with Brexit, that is still a feasible future challenge. We can do this. We can do this. Because, you know, you're still going to get, whether we're in or out, I don't know, are we going to be in or out? But we're still going to have migrating Eastern Europeans, and we're still going to be going there to do the things. Our CDM regulations came from the European Directive 9257 EC, it's still all of that. So what we call it, in or out, doesn't really matter. It's a whole culture of safety. So, okay, now moving on to my role in the ICM. I was appointed in 2018. ICM is the Institute of Construction Management. I was appointed in 2018 to the Executive Board as Director of Education and Training. I launched the National CDM Competency Registry, that's trademarked, at the London Build 2018. I was asked actually to open the Skills Hub there, which I was very proud to do, and chair the whole day. So during that day, we actually launched that, and I announced that at that forum that we had organised the trademark of competence, which is quite interesting. Nobody had done that. And that's held currently by the Institute of Construction Management. In 2019, I commenced on developing the CDM for BIM gateway, which is quite an interesting concept, because this is bridging the gap between the risk management side of CDM to the world of BIM, the design. You know, there's a big hole there. I was awarded Construction Manager of the Year. I'm very proud of that in 2019. I didn't think I'd end up getting more awards and things, but in 2019, the ICM awarded me Construction Manager of the Year. So that was nice. At the end of 2019, interestingly, the CITB, the Construction Industry Training Board, had got wind of what I and ICM had done in the couple of years of that. So they asked me to come and assist them to collaborate to develop the digital competencies framework. Wow, things are starting to really move on that. And that is part of the Unlocking Construction's Digital Future. It's a skills plan for industry from the research. And that research was Changing Construction, Changing Skills program that CITB had published almost extraordinarily at the same time as I was launching the registry at London Build and explaining our trademark protection. So CITB realised that with the trademark protection, I needed to be in there with them to develop. They couldn't move without, with what we were doing. Early this year, 2020, in pre-COVID times, the CITB bolted me onto several pilot projects that they'd funded to actually take the work forward. And we started this on talking with the people there, but that was shut down. Why? Because there was no construction industry. COVID sort of struck. Construction industry wasn't paying the construction levy. The CITB are funded from the levy, and government have now given a holiday for the levy in 2021. So realistically, the CITB is in a very dodgy, fragile state at the moment, and I'm desperately trying to prop them up and support them, and they know this. So in March, what happened? In March, the shutdown came, and that collapsed. But since July, and this is only July, a couple of months back now, a call went out from the Southeast Local Enterprise Partnership that they wanted to form a digital skills partnership. It's wider than construction. It's about mums and dads getting tablets and kids knowing how to get onto their schoolwork and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, I answered the call, and in July the 14th, I think it was 14th, we all came together online, and I've got myself, because I announced myself, told them what I was doing and whatever, and what we could do and things like that. I'm now remarkably co-chair of the Digital Skills Partnership for the whole of the Southeast LEP area, which is incredible. It's an incredible. Now, I'm also I'm leading on setting up the Civils and Construction Industry Engagement Day. We've got to get civil engineering going and construction industry going back into new normal. Well, I'm only a couple of months into that role now, but watch this space, So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and you touched there on CDM, and I'd like to quiz you a little bit about that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You've obviously got a lot of experience in actually forming the regulation in the first place, but just in a nutshell for the audience here, what are the key requirements of CDM as it stands at the moment?
It's a culture. Everyone thinks it's. I originally. Let's go through it's about sensibly planning work so that risks involved are managed from start to finish. So that's the headline. You've got to put the right people for the right job at the right time. That's what it says. So little blocks there. A lot of people, I often say to people, have you seen that little bit? It's not part of the reg. Well, it is part of the regs, but it's in a little bit of like the foreword of the things. If you realise that, it's all about right people, right time, right place. There's cooperation and coordination. Any work you do, cooperate with others and coordinate with others. Protect yourself and protect them. That's the obligation that's there, and have the right information about the risks and how they're being managed. You need that. The main set of regulations for managing the health and safety and welfare of construction projects. That's what it basically is.
Do you think this is something which, looking ahead into the future, because of what's happening with the hacking review and what's happening with other things we're learning and from different areas, implementation of BIM and MMC methods and so on, there's obviously quite a quality drive with or sharing of information and so on there. Do you think that this is something which is going to mean and is going to increase that collaboration and that inspection as well to create a more seamless thread, as it's explained in the hacking review?
Yes, it has to. That golden thread, I know everyone's sort of using it as a cliche and all that, but that's what it is. It is the golden thread, and in fact, sadly, a pal of mine, Tony Baker, he wrote a book. I wrote part of a few chapters in the book as well, in his book, but he died a couple of years ago, sadly. He wrote the bestseller of the RICS at the time. It was called CDM 2007 at that time, a guide for clients and their advisors, and that was a lot of that is still current. I did a lot of work on that in the paragraphs on it, when contractors go bust, how you maintain safety and all this sort of stuff on that. So that's still very current, on that. So it's an important point. Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of summing up then, what recommendations do you have in terms of building managers or the important things which you need to be conscious of for maintaining a safe environment with the common sense approach? What would your advice be in that regard?
Well, I think you have got, go back to this golden thread. Along that golden thread, I like to have actually protected. When I was talking with Tony, we talked about certain risks that ought to be ring-fenced by the front-end designers, so that downstream, if the facilities manager approaches that type of area and tries to change something or whatever, there should be controls, there should be checks and balances to actually alert that person making changes, that they're making fundamental changes to something that a designer has put a ring fence around. It doesn't mean they can't change them. What it means then is that because there is a design implication, a safety implication or whatever, that a proper process of looking at what the original concept was, the design concept, how it's going to change, what are the ramifications of that, put the proper controls and whatever, and then go forward on that. And that is, in essence, what will hopefully come out of the project that I'm working on, which is the CDM for BIM. Because what that will do is working, and this is the project that I was working on with the CITB, was all about digital supply chain, big supply chain, where it's all on blockchain, so that it's immutable. The records are there forevermore. You can't take things out of a blockchain. You just add things into them. And all of these records go forward, and with smart algorithms, when laws change, when standards change, you can actually change the raw granular metrics that you're applying to the safety metrics to the building that's been built 10 years down the line. That will then actually say, well, do a lot of the work, the smart work for you, and say, well, look, you can't put that on there, or because of this regulation and that regulation, this whole machinery will really do it. That's what we're working on in the Institute at the moment.
So two things I'm picking up there, two things for the future really, is that using digital to kind of bring that together, but ultimately having a holistic view of things. And one of the words you mentioned earlier was balance, having that balance there in place and tying everything together through close collaboration. Is that?
Oh, yeah. So you've all got to link together. You all got, there's a slide that I often put up, and I say there's no I in team. It's team is team. There are very few projects. There's one person that designs, construction, designs it and manages it. It doesn't happen. So you've got team there. So you've got to have them all threaded together, the golden thread. And if the information on that golden thread is competent information, it's going to happen. Safety is going to happen. Your drive safety, it's going to take some effort. We've got to work at it, but we will do it. It's not rocket science. I said to people, it's not rocket science. Safety, it's just application of what you know. I often say to people, come on, you know it's right. You know, that's I've said this. One of the schools that I used to manage, the caretaker, bless him, it was one of these Victorian schools where we've all been to these Victorian schools. And I was a schoolboy once, you know, a long time ago, where it was a Victorian school, and they're like,
yeah,
the ceiling was like 18 foot above the floor, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
And the caretaker said, David, he said, can you come down? They've got problems up in the loft. So I said, yes, yeah. You got? Can you get me up there? Or he said, yeah, we got a ceiling, one of these ceiling traps in the ceiling. So I said, well, okay, I'll come down. So I went down to the school, and I said, right, where's the trap? And he showed me into a stock room where the ceiling trap was. You know, it wasn't in the main room; it was in a stock room.
Yeah. In
that stock room was couple of 4-drawer filing cabinets, and on top of the filing cabinet was a set of step ladders.
Yeah.
That sort of took me up to the trap in the ceiling. So I said, how am I going to get up there? He said, well, I'll hold the filing cabinet. He said, you stand up on each of the drawers. He said, get on the top there and go up the top. And then you can imagine, I didn't do it, and I really tore into that chap, and he never did it again. But when you're not monitoring this, he knew it, and I said to him, look, you know how to do it. You've had all the training. You know about ladder security. And he said, yeah, but I didn't have a long ladder to get up to the. So it's that sort of approach, you know. It's not rocket science. You know how to do it. Do it. You know. Frustration.
So coming back then to your point on collaboration and so on, is if you were scoring this out of 10, how important do you think collaboration is to the industry? And the second,
it's right up there. It's right up there.
Yeah, and the second point really of that is, do you think that companies, because I think one of the things the industry is concerned about is by having collaboration, you're going to increase your costs. That's a typical mindset. Do you think that's a mindset people should be worried about, or what's your comment on that?
No. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. I reckon good safety is at best cost zero. Even better, it's a saving. You know, you're actually going to make money. You make money, you know, in terms of speeding up the job. If the job's less hazardous, you speed up. You know, I say to people, a bricklayer. I once took a bricklayer to pieces on a job. He was cracking the bricks, trying the half brick off the scaffold, and building. And when he wanted the next half brick, he'd pick up another full brick and crack it with his trowel and throw the other half off the scaffold. There were so many half bricks around in the mud around the scaffold. It was quite incredible. And bearing in mind, they were good bricks, you know, good hand-built clay bricks. No, you're paying £1 a time for those. You know, you pay £1,000 for a 1,000 pallet bricks. I went in on the Saturday and I picked up all these half bricks in the mud. They were muddy, they needed cleaning. And I stacked them all up on the scaffold either side of the spot board. And this brickie had piles of half bricks to build the rest of it. He wasn't best pleased on the Monday when he came in. He and I had a few words. But when I explained to him, I said, look, there's not one course that you lay that hasn't got a couple of half bricks in it. You've got half bricks either side of a window that you put in and a door and whatever. I said, look, just put a pile of these half bricks to the side and pull one of those up when you want to do it, you know, and never had any more trouble from that. But it's not rocket science. He didn't need a book to tell him. He probably knew that. But building isn't it isn't high. It's not rocket science. People have been building from the year dot. And just got to do it properly, and then it all falls into place. So that's my philosophy. I walked around scaffold and I'm always, when I'm on sites, I rarely go on sites these days. It's funny how you move in through the industry, and the big thing should be, you get detached a little bit from. But at the time when I was on site, I would always pick up nails and things like that, because not only are they wasteful, and a nail, even a rusty nail, you can still bang it into a bit of wood and it will still fix the bit of wood together. But it's also very dangerous in the mud. Somebody stands on that. Okay, I know we've got protected footwear and all this sort of stuff that would protect that, but not every case. So, safety doesn't have to cost money. It can be, if you've got a proper clerk of works on the job, everyone thinks, oh God, the clerk of works cost an absolute small fortune to have. No, it won't really. If you think about it, that clerk of works will maybe keep the job running better, save a lot of waste. The job might finish a few days, a week or so early, everything like that. So everyone, it is cost effective, There's an organisation, Giri, to Get It Right initiative. Are you aware of those?
I've seen it around a bit. I'm not too familiar with it.
They need to be followed, because they're doing it. They are doing it right, and I often go to their events. We sort of share views on that. I support them dearly. Because they're so refreshing to have in the industry, and that is the culture that we want to engender. Get it right first time. You're going to make a few mistakes on the way, but only make one mistake. It's an idiot that makes the same mistake twice. Yeah. But it's a student that makes a mistake and learns from that mistake and then goes on and does what he's doing better. So that's progress. That's and collaboration. You've got to collaborate more on this. As I say, there's no I in team, so you've got to work together. You've got to understand, and that way everyone learns. Everyone learns from it. So the whole thing takes off and becomes safe. And I think there will become a flip point. I think everyone's realising now. They're seeing what's happening in Grenfell, and they're seeing these so-called qualified people that have designed their homes, and 72 people have died because he thought, he should have been doing it. He thought somebody else was doing it. Somebody else wasn't doing it. There's a whole thing, he should have been doing it. He didn't do it. He thought he was, and whatever. And then in the end, no one did it. And then 72 people who thought everyone was doing it and they'd done it all, sort of let them down. And I think that's the message that would be, that is coming over to me, that we have let the trusting, innocent users of our buildings, we've let them down. And we've got to build this trust. We've got to build the industry back. That's what I'm doing. That's my drive at the moment.
And you meaning that from a collaboration point of, or lack of collaboration and communication point of view, that's how we've let them down, and that's also the way of solving it again.
Yeah, when I stood up at London Build 2018, and I announced that my institute, I have trademarked competency, the registration of competency in its widest form. And interestingly, trademark, whilst we call it the CDM competency registry, trademark is the simple words as well. The law of that is simple words as well. So interesting, I didn't realise this when we first embarked on that, but a lawyer pointed this out, and he said, well, you hold the trademark for competency, for CDM competency, but it's also for the simple words: construction, design, management. Interesting point. So industry through the CITB have picked up the fact that that's absolutely fact and true. That's why we've been now the first layer, which is the CITB on competency. But at London Build, when I announced that, I said it's very much like, it's almost Bernie Ecclestone situation. I said, Bernie Ecclestone isn't a racing driver. I said, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Bernie Ecclestone has ever sat in a Formula One racing car and driven it around a thing. But doesn't he hold the biggest, finest, the formula the whole world knows, F1? He holds that formula for its purity. Now, think about this. That formula, all of the teams around the world, any F1 that go to any F1, all work and race by that and carry out their business to that formula, that one formula. They can't deviate from that formula. Now, all of the people and visitors to any Formula One event around the world know exactly who's going to be there, what they're going to be doing. They're competent to have worked to the Formula One formula, and they know exactly that they can trust the event that they're going to go to. Now, put that to construction. If you have this formula for competency, okay, everyone then maybe develop the licensing situation, may have to work to that formula, okay? So to work to a framework, this is why CITB have developed the competencies framework. So all of the construction industry will work to the competency within that framework so that all the users, the lessees, the tenants, the people that have got to go to sleep in those buildings, they haven't got a clue on those buildings. So all those people can trust that the formula is protecting them.
Yeah.
So that's the journey I'm on at the moment, Nick. I started in 2018. We haven't finished by a long way. We've got a lot of work to do on competency, but I'm on that journey. And we're going to. We're driving. We're driving competence. That's what I say. I'm driving competence. But then what I want to do, this team, this sharing, collaboration. The next stage is that we as an institute hold that trademark, but I'm only holding it for the sector, for the whole industry. We will be sharing it, and this is why we're working. It's a bit of a journey. I can't do it in 5 minutes, but I need all parts. I need, Sapphire to be part of that and all that. You're part of it. We'll work together. We're all doing our bit to move it forward. So that's my vision. We've got to. We can't go on. We can't go on putting stuff on buildings that burns and all that sort of stuff. Killing people. Can't do that. And LABC and the approved inspectors and all that are there principally to approve works and to ensure compliance. They've got to understand that, they play a part too. And they've got to ensure that Regulation 7, a lot of the LABC, local authority, shy away from that, because if they actually understand and take that to heart, that the materials that they're approving in their things have got to be, compliant, appropriate, and whatever. A lot of them feel that they've been putting their head in the noose. I don't know. It's an interesting point, but it's a journey we've got to go on. That's the point.
And the point you made is quite an interesting one, that we owe it to the industry, really, to the public at large, as an industry, to actually get things right and to regain that trust by operating collaborative in a competent way, ultimately. But what would your takeaways? What would your 3 key takeaways for the audience be in terms of directionally some of the changes which might be in the sightline now for the industry?
yeah, a good takeaway would be, look, you know, we have got to up the game. We've got to raise the bar. You know, a name, a protected name, or whatever. Even membership of professional bodies isn't competence. It just means you're a member of a professional body. You know, it's like, I keep using the car analogy, but you know, if you've got a car with an MOT, fine. It passed on that one day when that MOT inspector passed that car. But then it's your obligation for the whole of the next year from the MOT date to ensure that car is safe and that you're not going to kill somebody on that road and all that. So, you know, everyone's got to realise they've got to play their part. And yeah, the takeaway would be that my takeaway is that there should be, competence should be able to be proven by anyone charged with doing a job, and they should be ready to prove that not just by their own claim, but by example, by third party. It's almost like a reference and things like that. You know, I tell you who's going to demand this coming out of Grenfell, the insurers. Believe me, they are going to drive competence seriously. They've had enough. You know, the risk. Look at the cladding risk that we've got. You know, the insurers are being asked to come in and help out with these massive sort of stripping off new cladding from buildings, and it's hundreds of millions of pounds on being spent on these projects. But you know, they're being passed on to users under service charges and things like that. But the construction industry is in a mess. It really is in a mess. So the takeaway is that we've got to get competent. I think we've got to have far more eyes and ears on the job. The clerk of works should be fully installed back on the job. Our institute is, interestingly, Institute of Construction Management. Construction manager hasn't got a statutory duty under CDM. It's an interesting point. You know, everyone says, "Oh, they manage," but you know, the construction manager should have a statutory duty. Somebody has got to manage that works. So that may be an area. It's a journey. I don't think there's any the takeaway is, yes, got to up the game and become competent and really do ensure that you know what you're doing before you actually do it, you know.
And one last point, thank you very much for your input on that. One last point from a CDM point of view, what do you think the key focus points would be for that and for Regulation 7 as well, to kind of summarise in the book?
I think it's got to be tying up capability. That's a word that's not been used on that. The capability, you've got the knowledge, you've got the skills, knowledge, and experience. But you know, capability is all about, say, it's that sort of quality. It's what I call a bad hair day. You know, even a good designer can have a bad hair day, or I hate Monday morning situation and do a design that you know, you can always have a good designer or a good contractor or whatever has a letdown. So you've got to have ways of being able to understand that, and that's where the collaboration, the teamwork, you're all watching each other, looking out for each other. That's really what CDM is, culture, you know. When I met the very first chief inspector of construction, and that was Stuart Natras, he said to a group of us, I was one of the first 200 in the whole UK to sort of see and work with CDM. And I go back to those words that Stuart actually said. He said, look, guys, he said, CDM is not a profession. He says, not a profession, it's a culture. Please, please, please don't make it a profession. So what do? We made it a profession. For the last, 26 years, we've had 3 iterations to try and get CDM right. It's still not right, but we're working on it. In all that time, the originating European directive, 9257 EEC, has never changed. Yeah, we've changed because we've been trying to get it right. First one, we created planning supervisors that neither planned nor supervised. The next iteration, we provided CDM coordinators, but they weren't too coordinated. All they did was produce shed loads of paper on the industry. So the last iteration is the government have said, look, you guys, you've got to do it. You've now got to get back to Stuart and Truss's original thing and put the culture there and do it yourselves, become competent. So what happens now, the principal designers now think, I can't do this. So they reach for the telephone and they pull in the old coordinator that's lost his job in the old iteration. They call him in to do the job that they should be doing as a consultant. But now the person now that they're giving that work to in a consultant role hasn't got a statutory. They used to be a statutory duty holder. They haven't got any statutory duties now except contractually to support the principal designer that's incompetent to do the job that he should be doing. Hang on, it's still nutty. You see where I'm going on this. I know. I know under the Hackett review, there is a new safety regulator. It's not there yet, so I'm hoping that will work. But unless we change the culture, isn't it same old again? But it might be better regulated. Think about that. It's an interesting point.
Yeah. So I like the point you made about collaboration being a key part of and we owe it to the industry. But that's been really helpful, and thank you very much for your time, David. If anyone's got any questions, we'd love to then submit them so we can speak about it at the panel discussion a bit later as well. But again, thank you for your time, David.
Thank you, David. Remember, if any of you have any questions for any of the panel today, please do scroll down to the Slido link below. We'll shortly be joining the panel for the live Q&A session. Thank you.
We're now live, everyone, so over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We would like to thank everyone that has been watching all of our presentations and sent in the questions for the panel. I'd also like to thank the panel for joining us today. Today we have joining us, James Walker from SIGMAT. We have Jeff Pelger from MyDeck. Lee Wilmershurst from Steel Build, and Phil Chitty from Sapphire Balconies, David Jones from the Institute of Construction Management, and we have Nick Horton from Sapphire Balconies as well. We do have apologies sent by Lawrence Macbeth from Alumet. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us today. But if you do have any questions for him, then I will send them on to him and we can always get back to you. Like I say, thank you everyone for joining us. I'd now like to start with the first of our questions. We have had some questions sent in to us from our from those who've been viewing over the last couple of days. Our first question would be to James. At what stage of planning would you say architects should consult companies like yourselves? Oops.
I think we're hearing you, James.
Sorry, James, we can't quite hear you there. Oh, no.
Perhaps we should move on to the next question and come back in a second, Kelly.
Yeah, we can do that. So I'll just move on to the next one while James sorts it out. This would be for Jeff. Rapid access sounds really interesting. How has it been working and has it been affected during the COVID-19 restrictions?
That's a good question. Thank you. Yes, at the moment we are trialing it on job, and practically speaking, it's working brilliantly. And from a COVID perspective, it's been received very well. From the perspective of not having to enter the residents' premises or actually being able to do everything from the outside. So yeah, I would say from that perspective, it's been fantastic.
Thank you. And I've got one here for Lee. Do you feel the changes that have been made will become the new normal on site?
I'm not sure they'll become the new normal. I think people will be more aware of pressures with programme, and I think things that we've taken for granted previously, this will definitely have an impact on that. I believe we will return to some sort of normal as we knew it previously at some point. Where that is, I'm not sure.
I'd like to ask that question out to the panel. Does anyone else find in their areas of work that the things that they've had to change will now become, the more normal for them?
I'm sure James would probably find similar to ourselves in the fact that the benefits we've been talking about for years in terms of manufacturing off-site, reducing labour and so on, have always been a benefit from a cost point of view and from speed and so on. But with people now being more reliant on labour and the delays on site and so on, and having to put measures in place which are ultimately necessary but are slowing things down, I think probably MMC is getting a boost which was perhaps coming in the future, but it's perhaps been accelerated. I don't know, James, if you're finding the same, and if you are able to speak here. Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we found that, again, previous jobs, being able to have minimal number of men on site is a benefit. It's helped with certainly the social distancing in the welfare facilities and things like that. And it can probably hasten people's decisions to move for that modern method of construction. And we've got better control of the health and safety and social distancing in the factory than you have out on a live site where you've got lots of different trades intermingling with one another.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing. I mean, certainly in Sapphire's experience, we have seen clients change programme where they've gone for trades that can genuinely separate and stay apart on site. That has made a difference. There are some trades where this just isn't possible. We've seen restrictions on areas on site, but I think this is going to become the new norm. The fact that when you walk onto a site, your temperature will be taken. You will be having a significantly longer induction, which will cover an awful lot more health issues as well as safety. Health is very much seen as a poor brother to safety. We do 95% safety and 5% health within health and safety, and this has always been a very, very poor balance. So if nothing else, what COVID has pushed is a much harder drive on the health side of health and safety.
Great, thank you, Phil. It kind of leads me on to a question that has been asked to yourself. Could you give us any advice on the Track and Trace app? Can we use in offices? Now, I know that you've implemented it at Sapphire, so could you give anyone advice that are thinking of maybe having that QR code kind of system up and running at their workplace?
Yeah, certainly. It was actually very, very easy to set up. I have 2 Android phones. I have it now on one of those. It only took a couple of seconds to set. As far as registering our Reading offices, again, was very, very simple. Just go onto the NHS website and follow the path through. We have now got the QR code set up in 2 places on our building, so that if we get any delivery drivers who need to access the building, they can zap. And also if we get any members of staff or visitors coming into the building. We are obviously on a minimal staff inside our building. We've got a lot of staff that can work from home, but we're also encouraging them to have the app on their phones so that the Track and Trace system knows where they've been. There are genuine benefits to using it. I can't see any sort of valueless points in it at the moment. The fact that you have something that can tell you what the risk is to you while you are there, the risk to your families as well, or to your work colleagues, has got to be beneficial. So certainly a very, very simple system. It relies on the honesty of the user. If the users around the country can keep it up to date, then the database only gets bigger and the thing gets a lot more accurate.
Thank you very much, Phil. Yes, I've actually downloaded it myself, and like you say, it's really, really easy to use. So definitely recommend it.
I'd be quite keen, Kelly, if you don't mind me jumping in there. Yeah. Lee, are you finding this sort of thing becoming more and more common with your people which are actually on sites and so on? Are you finding more sites are putting this into play now, or what's your take generally for the industry adopting that sort of thing?
Like yourselves at Sapphire, we've adopted this QR system, but I haven't had decent feedback from sites at this stage, whether it's working or not working. But one thing we've taken as a company is that we've had a Track and Trace internal system since day one, and we've decided we're going to continue with this because I don't think anyone should let up their guard because there's an app in place, because it is going through the testing process. We should all help the country track and trace each other. But at the same time, I don't think we should take our foot off the gas of any measures we've currently got in place as well.
That's a really good point. Obviously, we all have our own responsibilities, and it's great to know that other companies are, taking things seriously, like you say. Thanks for the feedback on that one. I do have a question for David. In your interview, you did mention the new safety regulator role. How do you feel that will affect the construction industry?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Such a brilliant question. My first answer to that is hopefully dramatically. We've got to do it. It's got to work. Dame Judith has actually said, before it even comes in, do it now. I said it before, didn't I? You know how to do it. You know what to do. Do it. It's not rocket science. So there's going to be lots of changes. The main drive behind golden thread, we keep hearing about this golden thread. Again, that's not rocket science. It's just linking it all together. But it's to retain this clear, current, accessible record of information relevant to the high-rise, high-risk, high-rise residential buildings, that primarily. But, eventually, we've got to engender this golden thread through the whole of what we do. And that's what's got to happen. And that question is great. So hopefully dramatically, and hopefully it's going to be part of my ongoing journey for this. So we've got to make it work. So, you know, we've got to support Dame Judith, we've got to support the industry, we've got to support Sapphire. Sapphire's got to support its own balconies on the buildings, and people have got to feel safe standing on your balconies. They've got to trust you, you know, they've got to trust the industry, and they do, because you've got terrific products. I know. Look around some of the prestigious developments in London, Greenwich is very near, Greenwich Peninsula, seen a lot of your stuff hanging on the buildings there, and it looks great. So, you know, you're one of these organisations doing it right, but we've got to get the whole lot into this. So, yeah, that's my, is hopefully dramatically is going to revolutionise and transform. Yeah, we're a new normal. Let's make it a good start.
That's great, thank you, David. It kind of leads, there was another question you just mentioned, really, the golden thread there. Someone has actually asked, you know, can you explain a bit more about how the golden thread actually works?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're starting to sort of put it all together. Basically, we're in the digital world. We're moving into the digital world. You know, I mentioned during my presentation that I've just joined the Local Enterprise Partnership for the South East, and I'm co-chair of the Digital Skills Partnership. So it's all part of it. So in essence, the golden thread has got 4 key information products, and that is a digital record, a fire and emergency plan, full plans, and a construction control plan. Now, we've already got health and safety plans that come out of CDM and all of this, and a lot of this information will already hopefully be in the health and safety plans, a file rather. But how often do we open the health, or we ask for the health and safety file if one exists? Thankfully, some do. When you open them, you find somebody's put in there, this section still to be completed. This section requires information from the M&E. This section requires, etc., etc. This certificate or the BBA certificate is missing. Look for it on the supplier's data and all this. So you've got incomplete information. The golden thread isn't there. So hopefully all of these 4 parts will come together. You know, the fire and emergency file goes over and above the requirements of a health and safety file, because what the new regulator body is health and safety, building control, fire. All of those 3 pillars have got to come together. Now, interestingly, the new kid on the block is going to be this super, what I call the super CDM expert. He's got to have all of those competencies for those 3 pillars. It's an incredible remit. But not only that, that CDM, we call it CDM, that is the building safety manager, has got to actually deal with the users, because that's what Dame Judith found in her investigation, that the user isn't being considered. Look at Grenfell. You know, I first approached Grenfell and came in Grenfell when the users were blogging 3 years before the fire, and it was Eddie Defan actually said those resounding words, and they're within me now in my psyche. He said, what's got to happen? 3 years prior to the fire, he wrote to the TMO an email and said, what's got to happen? Has this building got to be burning down before you people listen to us? So, you know, the new building safety manager has actually got to know the buildings that they're assigned to actually manage properly. But I don't know, worse than that, better than that,
what about when all the users are actually feeding information and their concerns to the building safety manager? It's not happened yet, but you know, how is that going to happen? It's going to be an overload of information. Hopefully the building safety managers will be able to competently handle that, because if they got sort of 100 flat people and they've all got problems with their front entrance doors, flat doors, which they did. Do you remember the 1,000 defective fire doors around that were found? Those users might well describe the problems that they're having with the fire doors in very different ways. They might say the yellow strip around the door, meaning the intermittent. Somebody might talk about smoke seal. Another might talk about this and that isn't fitting or has dropped off, or a bit of whatever. So somehow all of that has got to be brought together into this digital world to actually get the right information to the right person at the right time, setting up ticket systems. We're not there yet, and some of the work that I'm doing will have to bring in artificial intelligence. And I'm working with colleagues at Greenwich University on early scoping of this. How do we do it? A graphic user interface for the users so they can get to the building safety manager and that he's not overloaded with 10 weeks of information before he actually finds an urgent thing that he needed to deal with 9 weeks ago. It's that sort of situation. It's a big remit. We can only do it, I think, with algorithms, artificial intelligence, and of course, don't forget, in the high-rise buildings, users could be multi-language as well. So that artificial intelligence has got to understand the various languages and the cultures and the way things are described. So it's a big remit, you know. There's a lot of work to do. Again, it's my journey. Thanks. I could spend it all day, but there we are.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting. James, I'll probably come back to your question if that's okay. No, we can hear you. So what stage of planning would you say architects should consult yourselves?
As I was saying when you couldn't hear me, hopefully you can hear me now. The earlier the better, and it dovetails nicely into what David was just saying. It's that end-to-end process, because it's not just, it's that from that conceptual idea of what that building is to it actually being torn down at the end of its life. So obviously, in terms of going with modern methods of construction, the build methodology and the way the building goes together is very different to a traditional concrete frame or steel frame. So you've got to have that reliance on the building manager, the O&M manuals being used properly. So they're creating structural walls and flats that someone might just decide, oh, I want to knock something down and put a new kitchen in, and they need to understand what can and can't do. And say, it was very succinctly into what David was saying about people understanding what the building that they live in, the reliance on somebody to actually tell them, yes, they can do that, or no, they can't, or actually help them alleviate any defects that they might come across. So the earlier the better, and it's moving in a different way of building. I see it when you engage in the whole industry needs stuff and move away from not that D&B is evil, but it has some evil tendencies in that it all comes down to the bottom line and value engineering, and I can get rid of that, or I can go with a lesser product. Sometimes you need to stand up and be counted, and it's got to cost that, because that's it's the right solution for the right project for the right building.
Great, thank you very much, James.
It's interesting what both of you there have alluded to, and one of the things which we're looking at is an industry we're talking, sort of shifted the conversation, if you like, almost out of construction into the kind of the occupation of buildings and so on. And I know obviously, Jeff, you're quite involved in that end of things, but ultimately one of the things which we've all been noticing probably from the Grenfell inquiry and so on is the way that there isn't joined up thinking, or hasn't been joined up thinking in decision making, and how one aspirational value can have a massive impact on other areas. and what I think we're all kind of hoping for in the future of construction, and what does seem more likely, and is probably well facilitated by the likes of modern methods of construction, off-site manufacturing and so on, is more joined up thinking in terms of understanding consequences one thing has on the next, on the next, on the next, and looking at the thing from building a better building and then building the process better during that process. Is I'm thinking in particular, I guess, kind of the likes of once you've built once you've worked out the process and the values and the different things we need to choose from a product's point of view, it's then working back and actually saying, well, how can we make sure that we are delivering in line with the golden thread and all the other recommendations which are coming out of the Hacker report and so on. I mean, as you say, David, that involves collaboration, the digital, embracing MMC and that sharing of information. It's quite fundamental, isn't it?
Does anyone want to add to that? Sorry, before I move on.
Actually, yeah, if you don't mind. One of the things I've certainly picked up from David and from James in the last couple of minutes really is CDM as a piece of legislation obviously has been around since 1995. There have been various polls of architects since then, including one that I remember came out in 2004 that actually showed that only 27% of architects had even heard of it 9 years after it came out. There's an awful lot of concentration within the CDM regulations, or certainly put on there by developers, to concentrate all of their CDM works around the build phase. CDM is about more than building buildings. It has to be about clear strategies for ongoing maintenance, clear strategies for ongoing cleaning of buildings. You know, gone are the days when we know we can put a lamp up in a building and we can never change the light bulb without getting £1,000 worth of scaffolding in. I think we're past that stage now. But as Grenfell has shown, we're not past the stage where we genuinely look at building refurbishment as something that has an ongoing safety risk, not only for the residents, but also for those that have actually got to fit that stuff in the first place. So very, very much solid O&Ms and a good strategy for ongoing maintenance have got to be as much part of the build of a building as the pre and post construction safety plans. Very, very much can't agree with what David was saying more.
Thank you, Phil. Okay.
Or we're highlighting individual components of any build, but from my experience, it doesn't matter how well something's designed or ended, that every process needs to be checked through quality and different procedures, because the best design in the world installed incorrectly will be a poor design. The incorrect design installed well will still be a poor design, and so on and so on. So I think the industry's seen over definitely the last couple of years a massive hike in quality and traceability, and I think that's so important for whatever trade, however big or however small, because I don't believe I've met many people in construction that set out to hurt anyone. I believe the incorrect person makes the incorrect decision, which then has an impact that they're not aware of. So I believe when we're putting operatives to work or staff to work, it's about competence and making sure that this strategy is followed from start to finish with no gaps in it, because that's where you start to find the exposure of such dangerous occurrences.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And an additional point that I'd like to highlight is if you differentiate between new buildings being built and designed and a lot of the old buildings that are there already that have issues, I mean, that's just a completely different ballgame. And what we're finding is we're getting involved in a lot of solution-orientated discussion with regard to existing buildings with existing issues that have to now be sorted out. And that to me is also one of the biggest challenges that perhaps is not as straightforward, and more the solutions there are more kind of geared towards each different building and what's been done and what hasn't been done with them. So differentiating between new build and new ways of design and then fixing the old is quite a different challenge, I find.
So the MMC we're talking about, that obviously helps with quality control. So when you've got hundreds of men on a site on a project in lots of varying areas, it's very hard to control that quality. It can be done, it's proven to be done, but when you've got a product that's in a factory environment and it's in a lean process, it's very easy to control those processes. So I think that's where modern day technology lends itself well to quality, which obviously supports my previous comment.
I think you're right there as well in terms of the skill base. The site labour skill base is something that's dwindling in the UK. So the off-site and being able to control it in a controlled environment of a factory or a assembly process plant, and it adds to that quality. And again, to go back to your earlier point about a bad design put together well is still a bad design, and vice versa. Again, that rattles back to the early engagement of the way you're going to build and deciding on that methodology at the earliest point, so you can give yourself the time to integrate all the elements together, which feeds into, we're now trying to push forward with BIM, which is again fantastic, but it needs everybody to buy into it for it to be successful and breed that success on the project and throughout the life cycle of the building.
Great, thank you. Actually, you mentioned there, James, about potential labour, shortages, like skill shortages kind of thing. I did have a question for Nick. What can Sapphire offer that can benefit the industry with potential labour shortages and restrictions on site?
Yeah, I think this probably goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and what James just alluded to again there, is that really we've been talking about a labour crisis. We've been talking about Brexit and the effect that might have to a pool of labour way before we even started talking about COVID and the pandemic. And it makes things worse. And really, as Lee says, taking stuff off-site is much more controlled in a factory. You can get machinery to obviously automate different parts, and the same with the design process. I think that's where that's certainly where we are finding the biggest benefit is we're investing heavily in technologies which will help that design process and reduce the labour up front. In terms of a difference on feet on the ground, it's the innovation, the speed of the install and so on, and working with partners like Lee, who are very much we're looking at the way we can install things more in a clever way, basically, rather than rushing and doing it. It's about how we can build that into the design and get a better product built quicker and reduce the time on site ultimately. Lee, we obviously take a case in point. A few years back, we worked together on a big scheme on the Isle of Dogs, that 46-story tower, but the number of people we had originally thought about at the beginning of the build compared to what was actually being utilised during the build was quite different numbers, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. As you say, it's all about methodology, and I think regardless of whether it's off-site or on-site, I think that methodology is the best way forward. And as you say, a lot of the time it tends itself into a factory environment. But I also feel that as an industry, we can't go away from competence, and I think it's important we continue to bring people into our industry, because regardless of where the skill sets, I think it's important that we drive skill levels as well.
Correct. So de-skilling the process and upskilling the labour together is working for a better end result ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, you're muted, Kelly.
Sorry. I have a question here that has come in for David, but I think it's probably open to most of the panel as well. Do you feel that knowledge sharing has been a problem within the construction industry, especially where materials are concerned?
Yeah, that's an incredibly interesting point. Yes. Sharing of information about the commercial aspects, because we've got these statutory links, but we've got contractual links. You know, we've been hearing quite a lot for those of us that have been following some of the, hopefully some of the Grenfell. You can see the way that information has been held back, you know, particularly around the sort of the contractor, the supplier, the subcontractors, and the manufacturers around that. That certain information is held back, cost information. There's sensitive stuff there, and certain things get lost that could be vital. You know, I've always really opted throughout my life for almost the Nolan principles. You know, the last few decades I've been in senior management at local authorities, and I've adopted the Nolan principles, the 7 principles of open, honesty, transparency, all of those sort of things. That's basically a lot of how I've got to where I've got now, and why I'm driving you know, the competency agenda, because it has to be open, honest, transparent, so that when information comes, that the right information is there, you know. And there's been a lot of sort of exposure on the wrong information is there. You know, it's not only complex information. When you start looking at approved document B, that's only guidance, you know. And I've had this guidance is only guidance. So a competent person should take that guidance, information flows, and use them competently within their own knowledge, skills, and expertise, and come to their own design decisions. I did that in 1989. I was consultant to various local authorities as an individual. I was a cladding designer, and London Borough of Croydon had 8 high-rise residential blocks, as it happens, in the borough in 1989. And I'm still in touch with the guy. He's retired now, the maintenance manager. He rang me up one day and said, "Look, we've got these 8 blocks around in New Addington and Monks Hill and the various estates and things like that." He said, "They're getting very tired. They're the old, you know, 50s type buildings." He said his exact brief to me wasn't anything about thermal, wasn't anything about fire or anything like that. His exact brief was, "Can you pretty them up?" So I said, "Yes, of course I can." So I did, and I didn't worry about standards. I knew that whatever I wanted to put on that building shouldn't burn, shouldn't make the building any worse. That was the driving sort of principles. Again, as I said, it's not rocket science. So those buildings, I went for the standards weren't there in those days, but what we now call A1, you know, the non-combustible. I went for a non-combustible solution. Now, the fire in the Grenfell fire, the building research establishment went ballistic, looking at all the high-rise buildings quickly around in tranches to do tests. I'm proud to say those 8 buildings were 8 of the dozen. There was only a dozen that passed the BRE test, the first test that said, not a problem. So currently, Croydon Council, and I'm pleased to say, because there wasn't the money and the budget at the time to pretty them up, but Croydon Council are now retrofitting sprinklers to those, about a £10 million retro job. But that's the point, you know. I did that job, and I'm very proud of the fact that 8 of the dozen that passed were my buildings in 1989, and that's in that building. In my presentation, I mentioned about the smoke vent and the smart smoke vent that I'm developing. I'm developing on that. So we're going to be using smart technology like you're doing, Nick, with the Sapphire, embodying technology. We're moving on. So knowledge has got to move on. It's got to be open, honest, transparent, but it's got to be fundamentally sound. You know, people have got to rely on this. They've got to trust on this. So, as I say, we're all part of that that whole, and hopefully that whole is going to come together so that it's a big whole, and not. I don't mean a hole to fall in, because the industry, the sector, has really plummeted. The race to the bottom, we've heard. Hopefully, please, Grenfell is bottom found. We've got to go up. You know, that's the way. So yeah, it's all about this, and we'll only do that if information is properly shared. You know.
Yes, Dave, I think hopefully with people talking openly, honestly through events like these and things like that, people sharing their experience and knowledge, hopefully that can happen. So yeah, thank you very much. It's great to hear your story there as well. A great example.
Yeah, thanks.
Did anyone else want to add anything before we move on to that one? No? Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. Phil, how have you found working with the restrictions in place whilst visiting other sites? Because that's something that's quite big at the moment.
It is. It's not actually been too bad. I think the most important thing that we have found is just that regular communication with the client site team just always keeps you in the right place, obviously. Things certainly didn't slow down for Sapphire. We were extremely busy through the first couple of months of lockdown. I think between April, May and June, I think we delivered at least 800 balconies to site in that time, and they all would have been installed. So we've certainly been very, very busy still. We have proved to be a trade that can supply to the client's installer, who can then work in an appropriate way within a COVID environment. Things are changing a little bit now with the new unfortunate rise in the number of COVID cases. We are getting some clients that are starting to bring in additional rules, additional items of PPE to be mandatory on site, like face coverings. We never had that before because everybody was outside and we had a 2-meter rule. But I think it was established quite quickly that having a 2-meter rule on a construction site is quite impractical. So it hasn't slowed us down as a business. It hasn't slowed our manufacturing capability down as well. Our supply chain have fed into what we've tried to achieve very, very well. I back up what Lee was saying earlier. Actually, certainly the processes that we've seen put into place by our suppliers like Steel Build have been very rigid and are all about the safety of the employee. There's nothing really that's come up from our perspective that's genuinely made a huge difference to how we operate.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything in their experiences so far?
Yeah, I think it's important when this all first arose. Everyone took this very seriously, and I think a lot of people still do. But unfortunately, it's human nature to get complacent with everything. It's just human nature. No one can be frowned upon for it. I think we all do it, and I think if we're not careful, we're going to get a bit too relaxed with items, and it could damage our industry. Thankfully for us, our customer base is also take this very seriously, and we're okay. But throughout the industry, I'd like to see that it's kept controlled in the way it is, and it's driven forward.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Lee. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. Do you feel the construction industry is in a place to help young people and adults gain the skills needed to work in your sectors? Obviously, this is something that's been spoken about with the government. Do you feel that it's something that you're able to do within your areas of expertise and businesses?
Well, for us as Steel Build, it's something we're heavily involved in, and we are actually an accredited training centre. So before all of this happens, our vision is to invest in our industry and to bring youngsters into our industry. There's a big lack of skill or competence or understanding even of people and what they do. So we're driven over years to come to really give back and try and help our industry move forward. So we'd like to think that we're placed to try and help and support what's needed.
Great, thank you. James?
Not accredited in the same way as Lee mentioned, but we are continually bringing in young people and older people, and training them on what we do. Because we're a bit of a niche, a little bit different. It's not like a traditional method of building like concrete or steel, where it's widely used in the industry. So people that you do bring in, there's an element of learning, and for the younger people, it's starting from the ground up with them. We bring people in all facets of the business, right from the factory through the engineering, the design and detail, and the site side of things.
Jeff, do you have any experience with this? Sorry.
Not with younger people, but in terms of training and education, we deal with that daily, and it's. I think it links into the uncertainty about what makes a building safe and what makes a building compliant. So we are continuously advising clients on different options related to the products that we provide, but also even broader than that. So I think the issue or the subject of training and education is a massive one that links into this post-COVID environment and as well as this post-Grenfell environment that we're living in, because that's to me the way you create that a new world where people are collaborating correctly and traceability is all there. It's through people understanding the effects of what they're doing.
Nick, from Sapphire's point of view, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, we spend a lot of effort, and I'm sure Phil's itching to jump in on this as well, training our installers and working with teams, for instance, like Lee's teams and so on this. Yeah, I'm sure, Phil, you'd do a better job of explaining what we do from a Sapphire point of view, but yeah, fairly mirrored to what Jeff was just talking about there as well. And in a post-pandemic world, there's probably a whole education piece for the whole industry, really, about working together better, and that is likely, as has already been referred to earlier on, about perhaps the way procurement is happening will likely change. But I won't steal your thunder there, Phil.
I think there is one thing that I've certainly have picked up in the last little while. My eldest daughter has just gone back to university for her last year. University is still seen as the natural place for a college leaver to go. It's not natural still for people to be looking at apprenticeships as a viable way forward. Apprenticeships, I still feel certainly within our own education system, are seen as the poor little brother of doing a degree, and until we can actually get around that as an industry and really prove to people that pulling somebody in through an apprenticeship has just as much viability as somebody going off and doing a degree, then we are going to carry on with this skill shortage that we have. With regard to our own training, obviously we do an awful lot of training with our installers. We train up install teams on a reasonably regular basis. We've got 2 install training courses coming up in the next couple of weeks. We spend a reasonable amount of time with our installers teams, getting them to a reasonable standard so that they can not only understand our product, understand how it's built, how it's made, which gives them a greater understanding of how to install. We also go down the route of actually training people how to even lift our product off of the lorry when it gets to site before it's lifted up onto the building. So there is a bit of an end-to-end, the way that we do installation training. A lot of it is classroom, a lot of it is very practical. You need to do both sides of it. But as I say, just going back to my first point, we as an industry have got to get to a stage where we're not looking at things like as an apprenticeship as being a poor second to getting a degree. An apprenticeship, a 4-year apprenticeship in engineering, construction, whatever it's going to be, has got to be seen as just as viable, and then we will sort out this skill shortage.
That's great. Thank you very much there.
Can I come in on? Yeah. Interestingly, the apprenticeship system, C-levels have started this very month in September 2020. It's a totally new way of starting to train. Now, I saw this towards the end of last year when the ESFA, the Employment Skills, Education Skills Funding Authority, were sort of getting round these, going to the T-levels, the trailblazers and all of this, looking at new ways to actually grow the new talent that we need. So I've got involved in this with the Institute, and we are now part of what is called Apprenticeship Intermediary Ambassador Network. So that's the blown title, but we come together currently with COVID online. We've got a conference coming up very shortly. The T-levels were set up before, obviously, COVID. So there's a bit of a problem of getting them going. The government still wants to start them in September. The likelihood is that it's probably going to be in the spring before actually things start moving fully in that. But it's very much a fusion between work and employer. So it's a fusion between an employer that takes on a trainee, but it's not a trainee so much as like the traditional apprenticeship is 80% on the job, 20% bit of classroom learning. This is very much following on from the GCSEs. So it's a 16 to 19 year. It's a 2-year course that they will go through, with very much focused on things like Sapphire would want. It's not a full apprenticeship at that point, but it gives them 35 days of safe job experience, work experience, but a lot of classroom stuff where they can be taught about all the engineering things. It's more getting them ready and risk management and all of these things. So it's very much early days, but I think it's the way forward, and I'm very, very thrilled about this. And particularly the interesting thing is that part of the process of supporting the young people coming through is that they want an endpoint assessment, so I think I believe that the institute that I'm part of is ably set up to support that, to give endpoint and also to give accreditation, to give some sort of professional level that you people in Sapphire can know when these youngsters are coming through that they know how to risk assess, they know a bit about safety, they know that first step on a construction site and all this sort of stuff. So, we're hopefully in the next year or so, we're going to be starting this with, I'm thinking about a whole new way of qualifying these people with even a post-nominal, so that you actually know what these youngsters, when they come for their jobs, can actually do, so yeah, it is new normal, it's a new start, but we've got to grow the talent, That's what we're doing.
David, I think there's a number of companies, and it sounds like several on this call. I know Rydeck certainly work closely with a school which is educating people to be work ready, if you like. What do you think though, Phil and Dave, what's the role of CITB and the CSCS training accreditations and so on in this upskilling of the workforce generally in the future? I know previously it's been very difficult at times, especially when the funding comes up, the levy. What's your take on that, Phil, David?
Wow, CSCS cards, always a contentious issue. I get what CITB are pushing with this now, because to actually get a hold of a CSCS card, there is a significant amount of additional training that you have to do. Gone is the route where you can apply for a card, go and do a 50-question test, and then have to do nothing else for 5 years, which always seemed a bit of a strange idea to me, to go and sit 50 multiple choice questions and that calls you, and then you're safe. Now that it is being pushed as a significantly greater requirement, the unfortunate side of that is that a number of industries have been left behind by the CSCS system. Certainly for us as a balcony manufacturer, the nearest that we can get still is balustrades and staircases, I think, and to get an appropriate CSCS card, we've got to do an NVQ in carpentry. Doesn't really seem to fit our industry. But moving onwards, and I'm certainly keeping in contact with CITB about the CSCS system. There's a lot of consultation going on in the background. We are trying to push that industries do not get left behind. The only way that this is going to happen in the future is for them to genuinely look at every industry on an industry by industry basis. Very, very big ask for them. They appreciate it's got to happen. Difficult one. CSCS always a contentious issue.
Interestingly, we're working with a number of trade bodies that have been left a little bit high and dry with exactly what you were saying about the move to the CSCS situation. These construction-related operations, the CRO card, they're not construction, but they are construction-related operations. One of the big cards that were dealing with that was accepted has now been taken over and gone into the CSCS situation. But of course, what they've done, because CSCS doesn't recognise these, the grandfather rights and things like that, that you've built up the sort of quality of what you do over the years, they've been told that at the expiration, they'll run the current card, but at the expiration of the card that is currently there, they will have to go through all of this jumping through hoops again to get the new card. Now, that was, they were notified in the 1st of January, so that's fact. So I've been talking to a number of these trade bodies. That is there a way that our institute can work with these trade bodies to actually use our competency registry that I launched in 2018, and we're moving forward on that, to actually look at a completely new card, not a rival card for CSCS, but a competency card for all those construction-related operations around the construction site, for balcony installers and whatever, rather than having to find something that fits. Why not actually fit something that actually works, into the industry, rather than try and find a best fit that's already there? So in, I think, July, I should have been at the House of Commons. There was going to be a launch of a white paper on this, but one of these, but that's been slightly delayed. So it's very much imminent. I'm waiting for the call to actually support this, so that there is work in the offing at the moment on this, so that possibly a new type of digital identification that carries competence and things like that. We're looking at all of that at the moment. I'm very much in the digital world. I'm having to learn the digital world. It's a complete new science for me as well. My God, I've been 4 or 5 decades as a chartered surveyor up to me wherever in mud and all this sort of stuff. Digital, it's all new to me as well, but we've got to do it. We've got to embrace the digital world. So, and new ways, new competencies, new ways of recognizing them. Went through all that business on the CSCS cards, the bogus cards, the ones you could buy on eBay, etc., etc. And they were good all the time. Nobody checked them. The competent guys with the bogus cards that were running around, thousands of them, were good until somebody, and then CSCS said, okay, well, let's have a telephone check facility that we can check these quickly up, and that collapsed. So the digital world is going to drive this, all of that. So yeah, brave new world, new beginning.
Can I add to this? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I've got a bit of knowledge in this because I'm a qualified NVQ assessor. So and I set up a training centre. So with the MVQs, they took a long time to catch up. I don't think they're that far behind right now, because there is a subject within the CSCS card now, which is a specialist industry, and there's a lot of categories that fall under it. Balconies isn't one, and Balconies is one that I would like to try and implement going forward, because for me, balconies sit between a structural steel worker, architectural metal worker, and a slinger. So with our own guys, our competence check is we have MVQ slingers and either MVQ architectural metal workers or MVQ structural steel workers. And for us, that completes the trio of competence check. With MVQs, just so we're clear, because I know there's a lot of backlash with people that have been in the industry a long time. An MVQ is an assessment. So if you have been in the industry a long time, it is very easily achieved an MVQ, because MVQ is evidence-based. It's not training. So an MVQ isn't there to train someone, and it's very important that you're not allowed to teach people. So what you should be doing is assessing. So if I come to you and you have been doing this a long time, and you can support what you've been doing a long time, it really can be a short process, because the gathering the evidence is the easy bit. So I think a lot of it comes through lack of understanding about what is really required of someone. Unfortunately, as you said, and this is why we actually decided to create our own MVQ centre, there are bogus companies out there claiming funding and doing whatever. It's in every industry, it's in every criteria of life, unfortunately. There's always people out there trying to do this sort of thing. But over the years, I've been a bit pushed back with the CSCS card and the MVQ schemes. But now that I understand what I do to the depth that I understand it, there is some mileage behind it, and it isn't that much of a drama to get yourself up to speed if you've been in the industry a long time. And people shouldn't be scared, because it's not about being any better than you was yesterday. It's just about fulfilling a requirement.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to have to start rounding up now, because we have come towards the end of our session today. I would just like to ask the panel if you had a quick, just a takeaway on anything you've learned through COVID that you will be taking forward into the future. So Nick, did you want to start?
I think really it's about the things we've been talking about as good principles, the implementation of BIM, the modern methods, the many of those different aspects of it. It's not just COVID which is highlighting to us the benefit of actually embracing some of these as a holistic view of it, not just taking one aspect, for instance, speed, and just focusing on that. But I think that's really what the last few months, I say the last few months, because I think that includes what we're learning through the Grenfell inquiry as well. But that's really my key takeaway.
Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, certainly one thing. Humans don't breathe through their chins. Please wear your mask over your face. Seen that far too often in the last little while, and people do breathe through their noses, so make sure it covers that as well. But yeah, on a more practical note, one of the things that we have seen actually is a significant improvement in things like personal hygiene and that sort of stuff on site. Actually, people having to take significant action to stop themselves from getting a contagious disease. And also, it has actually highlighted the risk of contagious disease. It's unfortunate that it's taken a worldwide pandemic to do it, but there are genuine risks out there. I certainly get the reports from government every week to show that there are still some very, very serious diseases out there, and we need to keep ourselves protected from them.
Thank you very much, Phil. James? James, did you want to add one final takeaway?
For me, obviously being office-based and having to work from home has been a bit of a revelation. It could be done. You can be in a meeting in Edinburgh at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and by lunchtime in London. So it's that remote working and the collaborative nature of that, and not having to spend half your life crawling up and down the motorway is a definite improvement.
Thank you, James. Jeff?
Mute the space bar wasn't working. Yeah, I second what James says, and also with regard to a kind of site-based scenario, I've observed that in most cases sites have reduced the numbers that they have, and I think the lessons we're starting to learn, and Lee's probably seen this, is that people are surprised at how much work can be done by a lot fewer people. And I think that's a key takeaway for me in terms of this COVID effect, and that is to be more efficient, actually equal being safer.
Thank you. And Lee?
I think my key takeaways are keep integral, look after your supply chain, look after your staff. I think if you can do all those three things, I think everything will be okay.
Thank you, Lee. And David?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, COVID reminded me and reminds me how everything can flip in a blink of the eye. You know, my 10th of March, I was up in Coventry with a great group of people in the Direct Works Forum, speaking to organisations controlling over 2 million social housing. Terrific organisation. Haven't done anything as a group, but you know, things can flip. The COVID has flipped the sector. It's flipped the world. But let's just think in terms of construction. And you know, competency and all that. It's actually flipped. We're doing how we're looking at things. You know, we're having to look at occupational health better, safety and things like that. So new normal, we will do it. We'll get through this. There'll be more processes, there'll be more competence, more thought about things. Cohesive, generally looking after your safety of yourself and looking after the safety of others around you. So it's that message, you know, it's that preparedness for eventuality of the unexpected, you know, and that's an accident. So the more prepared you can be, the less likely, and that's the risk metrics, isn't it? Likelihood and probability, the less likelihood of an accident, and the more preparedness and better product and whatever, and better work abilities and things like that, the less severity. That you're not going to stop everything happening, but you're going to lessen it. It's taking that level, you know, the level of where when that flip happens, accidents will happen, but it's getting them to the manageable proportions, and that for me is the challenge as industry gets back. Hopefully 2021, please, let's have a vaccine, let's all get back to work. We can take the masks off and take the tablets and, you know, whatever, and get back. But don't forget that flip that happened, you know, the COVID flip. And we've got to carry that with us. It's a warning. It's a warning to the world, warning to the sector. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you, David. I'd just like to thank everyone that's joined us today and who's been watching all the presentations over the past few days on our system. We do have a poll that's just coming up just to get some feedback. We like to continue to improve our events and make sure we're covering those important topics that everyone wants to hear about. Website, you can actually see